The sun has gone down at Hangman's Hill, and the ghost at Misery Corner isn't walking tonight. So, welcome to the Weird Tales Radio Show, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. And now, here's your host, writer, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and sometime werewolf hunter, Charles Christian.
Hello and welcome. This is the 24th of January, episode 49 of the Weird Tales Radio Show podcast. I'm Charles Christian, and sadly, once again, Janie cannot be with us because she's still suffering with a croaky throat. Aren't you, Janie? Yep, she's nodding her head and saying yes, she can't. Anyway, another packed show ahead of us, which I hope you'll enjoy. And can I just say thank you for joining us. Time to have another look at our ritual calendar of obscure folklore traditions associated with the days of the year. And we start with the 22nd of January, which is St. Vincent's Day. I know, who knew? Notes I've got here say, little is known of Vincent of Saragossa, apart from the fact that he was martyred for his faith in the year AD 304 and was widely popular as a saint across Europe and in Anglo-Saxon England. The English tradition, his day is now only remembered in weather predictions, most of which agree that sunshine on this day is good for the year. Here's a Northumberland version from 1904. Remember on St. Vincent's Day, if the sun his beams display, but sure to mark the transient beam, which through the casement sheds a gleam, for 'tis a token bright and clear of a prosperous weather all the year. That's the 22nd St. Vincent's Day. 2 days later, we have the 24th, which is the eve of the conversion of St. Paul. And there's a strange tradition in parts of England, particularly in Cornwall and the West Country, associated with broken crockery. Here's a report from 1886. St. Paul's Eve is a holiday with the miners, these would be tin miners incidentally, and is called by them Paul Pitcher Day, from a custom they have of setting up a water pitcher which they pelt with stones until it is broken into pieces. A new one is afterwards bought and carried to a beer shop to be filled with beer. In other examples from the same time period, late 19th century, children roam the streets throwing broken crockery at people's doors. Yes. And there's no obvious or rational explanation for this. It's just something people once did. Next day, because of course we've just had St. Paul's Eve, we've got St. Paul's Day. And what happens there? Well, it's another weather one. And again, it determines what happens for the rest of the year. Here's another ancient one. We're talking 1884, so that's a little bit earlier than the St. Vincent's weather one. If Paul's fair be fair and clear, we shall have a happy year. But if it be both wind and rain, dear will be all kinds of grain. If the winds do blow aloft, then wars will trouble this realm full oft. If clouds or mist do dark the sky, great store of birds and beasts will die. Those weather predictions apparently go back to the 17th century, but a bit like the Paul's Pitcher, no one's yet come up with a suggestion why that particular rhyme has been associated with St. Paul, who, to my knowledge, was not a weatherman. Time to go on another of our urban myth-busting adventures. Janie, you can't hear her because she's still got a bad throat, says we ought to have a special theme song for this. Yeah, see what we can do. Anyway, urban myths. We're all familiar with the concept, but where did they come from? You sometimes think you know the origin, but when you start digging, you realise they are far older than you imagine. For example, when I was a kid, the insects in the beehive hairdo myth was in full swing. This was in the days of Dusty Springfield, Ronnie Spector and the Ronettes and Brigitte Bardot. Anyway, the version I heard from my mother, who heard it from her hairstylist, who had in turn heard it as a fact from another hairdresser in town, was that a woman kept her beehive teased up and sprayed with lacquer for so long that eventually insects nested in her hair and began burrowing into her scalp. This is sometimes known as faux tales or folklore, as in friend of a friend source for an urban myth. So far so yuck. Except this story seemed to emerge simultaneously on both sides of the Atlantic. There's also a variant that has men with long dreadlocks being similarly afflicted with insect infestations. However, go back a little deeper and you find that the same legend cropping up throughout history whenever bouffant big hair or wigs were in fashion, going right back to medieval times when a certain lady of Aynsham in Oxfordshire, who took so long over the adornment of her hair that she used to arrive at church barely before Mass, one day died of fright when the devil descended upon her head in the form of a spider and only let go when doused with holy water. One of those legends that goes back longer than you think. On the other hand, there are some other urban myths, supposedly dating back to ancient times, that turn out to have been invented only a few years ago. The Slender Man is a good example of that, which began as an online competition. Another one that I'm always fascinating is love locks or love padlocks or wish locks. The concept is simple enough. Two lovers celebrate their everlasting devotion and commitment to each other by attaching a padlock to a bridge and then dropping the key into the water below. Ah, cute. Anyway, love locks can be anything from commercial padlock that has the lovers' names felt tipped onto it through to custom engraved heart-shaped locks. And if you visit just about any destination bridge anywhere in the world today, you'll spot love locks clinging to the railings like barnacles on a ship's bottom. You'll also spot quite a few cycle and motorbike locks as well, though I can't help think that symbolises not so much a healthy devotion as a possessive obsession. That other couple are into bondage. But where did the love locks begin? If you look at any of the websites dedicated to love locks, better make that websites dedicated to selling love locks, you'll find it all started in ancient China, when two star-crossed lovers threw themselves off a peak in the Hangshuang Mountains rather than be separated by the girl's forced marriage to an old mandarin. That was a social rank in imperial China rather than a small orange. We're not into autoerotic games here. Ever afterwards, lovers visiting the mountain would fix padlocks to the guard chains surrounding the peak to symbolise that their love would also last for all eternity. Except it didn't. Excavate a little deeper and you discover the first recorded incidents of love locks being padlocked to bridges go back no earlier than 2006. One moment there are no love locks on a bridge, and then there are a handful, then there are hundreds, and then in some instances there are thousands. For example, in Florence, Italy, the city council hacked 5,500 padlocks off the Ponte Vecchio bridge in one clear-up, while in Dublin, Ireland, a spokesman for the city council commented in early 2012 that the fixing of padlocks on the Halfpenny Bridge over the River Liffey had only started in the last few months, and we're asking people to stop doing it because it's damaging the paintwork. So, nothing from the time of ancient China, then in 2006, 2007, 2008 onwards, the press is full of stories about love locks across Europe, Asia, South America, North America. You can even find them on the Wild Pacific Trail on Vancouver Island. So what's it all about? Enter the Italian author, screenwriter and film director Federico Moccia, whose best-known book, Ho voglia di te, I Want You, was published in 2006 and made into a movie in 2007. As part of the plot, a young man, the story's protagonist, convinces a potential girlfriend of a legend in which lovers wrap a lock and chain around a lamppost located on the north side of the Ponte Milvio bridge in Rome, lock it and throw the key into the river Tiber. And then, asks the girl, and then he replies, "We'll never leave each other." Yeah, okay. Well, perhaps not till the morning after. In an interview with the New York Times in August 2007, Signor Moccia explained that he invented the whole ritual because he liked the idea of tying locks to love. By then, the book had sold over 1 million copies, and then the movie came out, and then life began imitating art, or what folklorists call ostension or legend tripping, the real-life imitation of elements from a well-known story, as locks and chains started appearing on first the Ponte Milvio bridge and subsequently on other bridges. Perhaps it's not quite such an old tradition as all that.
Something wicked this way comes. Weird Harvest Press presents Harvest Hymns, the sweet fruits and twisted roots of folk horror, a 2-volume set of books investigating the music of folk horror, featuring contributions from some of the biggest names in the field: Candia McCormack, Johnny Trunk, Maddie Pryor, Sharon Krause, Jim Jupp and Kemper Norton, to name just a few. Available now via lulu.com. 100% of all Weird Harvest Press profits are donated to wildlife charities.
Welcome, fool. You have come of your own free will to the appointed place. It is time to keep your appointment with the Wicker Man.
Let's have a story about a mad and murderous member of the aristocracy who came to a sticky end. Now, down the road from where we are located here in South Norfolk is a town called Bungay. And if you head out on the Norwich Road from Bungay, you will pass a large stately home called Ditchingham Hall. And it's a private house, currently the home to Robert Shirley, the 14th Earl Ferrers, and it is not open to the public. However, this is not an issue here because our interest is not with the current owners, but with one of the current owners' most notorious ancestors, Lawrence Shirley, the 4th Earl Ferrers. Born in 1720, this particular Lord Ferrers quit his studies at Oxford at the age of 20 and headed off to Paris for, according to contemporary accounts, a life of debauchery. That's a bit better than a gap year, isn't it? At the age of 25, he inherited the earldom from his insane uncle, the 3rd Earl Ferrers. Insanity running in the family, eh? And with it came estates in Leicestershire, Derbyshire, Northamptonshire, as well as Ditchingham here in Norfolk. In 1752, Earl Ferrers, who was then 32, married 16-year-old Lady Mary Meredith. However, just 6 years later, she obtained a legal separation from him on the grounds of cruelty. Another contemporary report said she could not accept his drinking and womanizing, lived in fear of his drunken rages and violent outbursts, and was particularly upset by his illegitimate children. The Earl, it should be noted, had continued his relationship with his long-standing mistress throughout his married life. Some indication of how bad the marriage was can be gleaned from the fact that Mary obtained her separation by an Act of Parliament in 1758, back in the 18th century, 100 years before the 1857 Matrimonial Causes Act, which started modern divorce proceedings in England. Just about the only way for a couple to legally separate was for one of them to obtain an Act of Parliament. Yeah, that bad. As part of the separation settlement, the fourth Earl was required to pay Mary an income from the rents of some of his properties, and the estate was put in the hands of trustees to ensure this was done. One of these trustees was a family steward called John Johnson, who had the responsibility of collecting rents and paying them to Mary. Not surprisingly, Lord Ferrers took a dislike to Johnson, who he suspected had helped Mary with her separation proceedings and believed was paying her more money than what she was entitled to. On the 18th of January, see where we are with the dates now, in 18th of January 1760, Johnson visited Earl Ferrers at the Earl's request at his mansion in Leicestershire. The two men met in private in the Earl's study, but at around 3 p.m. that day, a furious argument could be heard by the servants on the other side of the door. An argument that ended with an abrupt pistol shot. Johnson had been shot by the drunken Earl Ferrers. Johnson died the following day, and the Earl was subsequently arrested and transferred to the Tower of London to await being tried for wilful murder by his peers at Westminster Hall in London. Peers of the realm at that time could only be tried by other peers, not by commoners in a normal criminal court. The trial opened on the 16th of April and lasted for 2 days. The prosecution was headed by the Attorney General and by the Solicitor General, whereas Earl Ferrers conducted his own defence, which all criminal defendants had to do in those days. The Ferrers family persuaded the Earl to plead insanity, which may have appeared to be an easy option for almost everyone, because everyone who knew him thought he was mad. The family's opinion seems to have been primarily motivated by their own concerns for their family's reputation, it being thought better to have a murderous madman in the family than a common killer. The Earl subsequently admitted he only pleaded insanity to oblige the family and that he was ashamed of his defence, as he felt shooting was justified, which, ironically, does suggest he really was insane if he thought killing somebody was justified. One of the witnesses called was a certain Peter Williams, who had once looked after the Earl's horses, but Ferrers was so dissatisfied with Williams' services that the Earl seriously injured him with a sword and then hit his wife, that's Williams' wife. However, in a disturbing insight on the social values of the day, the Solicitor General said this was not proof of insanity or even of eccentric behaviour, adding that if a man can't take such action against negligent servants, then all the peers present would be in the dock. At the end of the trial, Earl Ferrers was held to be legally sane, or as one of the peers present commented, not mad enough, and found guilty of murder. The only punishment was a public hanging at Tyburn, which appalled Ferrers, as this was the death of a common criminal, so he actually petitioned the king to be beheaded instead. Unfortunately, his petition was rejected because beheading was no longer legally available punishment for murder, only for treason committed by a peer. That said, on the day of his execution, the 5th of May 1760, both the authorities and Earl Ferrers, in the words of another writer at the time, put on a good show for the so large a mob that had collected because the people had never seen a lord hanged before. Ferrers was driven from the Tower of London to Tyburn, which is modern-day Marble Arch, just down the road from Selfridges if you're shopping on Oxford Street. He was driven down the road to Tyburn in his own coach pulled by 6 horses. He was accompanied by several other carriages, including a mourning coach, that's mourning, mourning, carrying his friends and a hearse, and also a troop of cavalry. The authorities had also constructed a special new gallows with the scaffold platform tastefully covered in black baize cloth and featuring a nice new black cushion for the Earl to kneel on when he said his final prayers. The Earl wore the same outfit it is worn at his wedding, which was a light-coloured satin suit embroidered with silver, and as a concession to his rank, the rope used to hang him was of silk rather than common hemp. He was hanged by the neck until dead, and later that day his body was taken down, placed in a coffin and transported to Surgeons' Hall, where it was dissected and put on public display for 3 days before being returned to the family for burial. Lord Ferrers, incidentally, has the dubious distinction of being the last English peer to be executed.
If you want to grow your business, save time using the latest tech, and look great online, Weird Appeal Digital can help. We have a free, yes, that's free download listing 40 digital tools, apps and resources to help you grow your brand, promote your project, generate leads and reach your audience. Just go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales for smart, effective digital design, and your free download. Go to www.appeal.digital/weirdtales.
And we're going urban myth busting again. And we're looking at the phenomenon of shoe tossing, or shoe fetty, as some people call it. Prompted to do that, I was out walking in the countryside around here with Janie. This was before she succumbed to her cold. Isn't that right, Janie? Yep. And we happened to notice a tree with a load of old shoes thrown over it, over the branches, and realised this was the rural equivalent of the shoe tossing you see in towns where shoes have been slung over power cables, telephone wires, etc. in streets. For those of you unfamiliar with it, where have you been? Essentially, you take a pair of shoes, tie the laces together and sling it like a bolus, and if you aim right, it wraps itself around the wire and stays there. So, good question. Why do people do it? Well, it's a topic that has lent itself to multiple explanations, some of them possibly plausible, some of them somewhat weird. On the plausible ones, it's what people do when they're drunk. It's what people do, particularly students. Certainly notice it in Norwich in student areas when they've passed their exams. Some major life event has happened. In the US, it's been associated with the military that they would throw a discarded, no longer needed pair of boots, either when they've finished basic training and they no longer need their initial boots, or when they're leaving the services altogether. They sling them over there as a, rites of passage element. There's also the possibility it's things that happen with drunks, things that happen with bullies, taking somebody's shoes and slinging them away, drunks doing them rather stupidly. And then there's all the other suggestions. One is that crack dealers or drug dealers throw shoes over wires to advertise their presence in the neighbourhood. Now, I may be missing something here, but if people wanting to buy drugs wandering down the street spot the shoes and think, there's a dealer nearby, well, wouldn't the police also have a similar experience and think, hello, there's somebody around here? There's another suggestion that it is used by gangs to notify that they've taken over a particular area. So quite how a pair of boots that you can hardly see will indicate it's one gang rather than another, I don't get. It's also there when a gang member has been killed and his boots will go up there. He's hung his boots up for the last time. There's another suggestion. It's because the boots are nearer to heaven, which is where he is. And the version for areas where you don't have gangs, it's where there's been an accident. Somebody's died in a road accident or been run over by a car or knocked off their bike, which makes sense except for the fact that in some areas there are so many boots. There must have been massacres. If you get a chance, look at any photographs you can find of Nordenstrasse, that's Northern Street, in the German town of Flensburg, where the entire street, you can barely see that for the number of shoes that have been slung up there. So perhaps it's not accidents. Perhaps actually the rather more boring explanation is people do it for a laugh. Have a few drinks, that was fun. Bit of a joke. And of course, let's not forget that there is also a sporting side to this, and that is boot throwing, though it tends to be Wellington boots. In the town of Taihape in North Island in New Zealand, it's known as the gumboot throwing capital of the world, and they have an annual gumboot day when people are awarded a golden gumboot as a trophy for throwing their boots the furthest. Happens in Eastern Europe, it's quite popular. Also Australia, Russia, Finland, where the first Finnish championships of boot throwing were organised in 1976. And over in the UK, we have a thing called welly wanging, where, same thing, how far can you throw a boot or a pair of boots? But we got no nearer to where did the tradition start? What kicked it all off? Well, looking on Snopes, the well-known myth-busting website, they comment that in the 1997 movie Wag the Dog, which featured Robert De Niro and Dustin Hoffman, who are a couple of political PR people creating a fake war, they conspire to festoon a tree, or they conspire to festoon lots of trees with shoes as a spontaneous, as in PR organised, show of support for a manufactured war hero, Sergeant William Schumann, known to his colleagues as the Old Shoe. So they throw shoes, Schumann, over it. And I say that is an incident in a movie, but intriguingly, in the years that followed that, incidents of shoes being spotted over wires increased noticeably. Chicago had the electrical company there, looks after the power cables. They produced returns on the removing boots from power cables, and it peaked in the year 2009, that's 10 years after the movie came out, but since then has gradually declined, and the last date we've got figures for, 2014, it was down to just a quarter of the number that were thrown in the peak year of 2009. So it's again rather like a story we carried earlier about love locks. Is this something that actually began as a media event, an incident in a movie, and people thought that was funny and took it up, and it's now developed a life of its own, and now it's a tradition, and now lots of strange mystical reasons are being developed to explain the phenomenon of shoe tossing. And of course, if you really want to get rid of your shoes, you can always give them to a charity. And that's it. We're almost out of time. Before we go, one last little story, and it's another suggestion. It's another of the treats I got myself for Christmas, actually. A new book. It's published by the National Trust. It's A Treasury of British Folklore, subtitled Maypoles, Mandrakes and Mistletoe, and it's by Dee Dee Cheney. And if you think the name is familiar, Dee Dee is the co-founder of the very popular Folklore Thursday online folklore magazine and Twitter phenomenon. It's an intriguing book. It's split into three parts. Land, Plants and Animals is the first part, then Witchcraft, Magic and Heroic Tales, and then the final one, The Milestones of Life. And I have to say, because I do read a lot of folklore, I have encountered many of these before, but part 3, there's a lot of stories in there about birth, the chime hours, love, marriage, home life, working life, death and burial. Lots of stuff in there I've never ever encountered before. So well worth having a look at it if you can find it. I've got a hardback version, $12.99. I don't know whether there's a paperback version out yet. You can buy it on Amazon. Definitely worth looking at. Anyway, that's all from us. I'll be back next time. That's me, Charles Christian, and Janie will be as well. She will have recovered by then, I'm hoping. So thank you very much for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed the weird tales. Until the next time, stay well, stay weird, stay different.
Black Shuck, the demon dog of East Anglia, is baying at the moon, which means it's time for us to go. You've been listening to the Weird Tales radio show with Charles Christian, your weekly fix of ghost stories, urban myths, magic, and folklore. Keep in touch with us online at www.urbanfantasist.com or by email at urbanfantasist.icloud.com or on Twitter at Christian Uncut. Good night. Join us again next week for another edition of the Weird Tales radio show.